Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on the programme today, a ceasefire between Israel and the Hezbollah militant group is now in effect as Lebanon reels from more than a year of deadly clashes. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reaffirms one key ceasefire condition: that Israel retains complete freedom of military action. This as displaced Lebanese residents start returning home. And the US President Joe Biden, meanwhile, says the dust has not settled as he renews a push for a truce in Gaza. Hello and welcome to the programme. First, after extensive negotiations led by the US Envoy Amos Hochstein, Israel and Hezbollah, that's Lebanon's Iran-backed group, have agreed to a 60-day ceasefire, bringing to an end more than a year of conflict. Well, the deal went into effect on Wednesday morning, and under its terms, Israel is expected to halt operations in Lebanon and withdraw its troops from the south within 60 days, while Hezbollah fighters will pull back north of the Litani River. That's about 30 kilometers from the Israeli border, where Lebanon will deploy around 5,000 troops. Well, the war has cost Lebanon an estimated $8.5 billion in physical and economic damage. That's according to one estimate from the World Bank. Well, to talk to us more about this is Lebanon's Economy and Trade Minister, Amin Salam. Thank you so much for joining us once again here on Al Arabiya News. Reports that we've received suggest there have been some celebrations in Beirut. Hezbollah supporters portraying the truce as being a victory for them. Is that how it feels for people in Lebanon right now? Does this feel like a victory?
Hello, and thanks for having me with you guys. Well, let me tell you, it's a very happy day for Lebanon. It's a very important and critical day for Lebanon. I wouldn't put it in the context of victory. I wouldn't put it in the context of celebration. Yes, the Hezbollah base they have been driving back to their homes, to the south, driving back to their cities to check on how things are. To them, it's a joyful moment that they're going back to their villages, their houses, their areas to see what's happening, because they have been displaced in very dire conditions for a long time. But I can tell you from a political perspective, it's not yet a time to celebrate. It's not yet a time to declare victory. It's a time to really monitor and hope that this ceasefire will accomplish its full targets and will pass those 60 difficult days, leading to a longer standing stability and peace for Lebanon and for the region. This is really how we are looking at it. This is how I'm reading it from my position, especially as Minister of Economy, which is the biggest struggle in this country today.
Does it feel like a fragile ceasefire when you look at it? I mean, let's not forget the bombardment of some areas of Beirut only ended less than 24 hours ago. So I know this is a difficult question to answer, but I mean, do you see it holding?
It is a very fragile ceasefire. I mean, you could feel even to the last minute or to the last few hours before the ceasefire, Lebanon was being bombed very aggressively. I can tell you from my location where I am now, yesterday I was in my office, bombs were all over this area. I mean, we could see them, we could feel them, we could hear them, ambulances all over the streets, still massive casualties. So this ceasefire is very, very fragile. That's why I'm using the term we should monitor carefully the next 60 days, because any escalation, any mistake, any bad intention from any side can lead to the complete destruction of all the good work, all the diplomatic work that has been done to lead to this ceasefire.
Some people will be wondering, and it must have felt like a very long few weeks of Israeli bombardment. But what took so long? Why couldn't this deal have been secured sooner?
Well, I can tell you this deal is over 3 weeks old. I mean, the basic elements of this deal were already in place. The biggest problem with this deal was that the Israeli side, first of all, asked to put France outside the equation. That was a big blow to Lebanon, and that was a big blow to the deal. But the more important one was the one that related to the sovereignty and decision of the Lebanese people, including Hezbollah as well, for Israel to feel that they can intervene and they can assess any non-compliance of the 1701, where they can intervene immediately through the sky or through the land and break the ceasefire when they see appropriate, without having the US or any other country being involved. That was a major pending element of the deal that dragged it another 2 weeks until the United States stepped in and said, I will be the one that will bear this responsibility. I will assess if there was a non-compliance or if there was a violation of 1701 or of this agreement particularly, and then we will assess what needs to be done. Now, this has been kind of camouflaged in a certain political diplomatic way within the deal, but the US managed to help us get over that article and then get the approval from the Lebanese side, followed by the approval from the Israeli side.
Okay, so Israeli forces, we understand, are going to start leaving the border area in the south during the course of the next 60 days. And I'm wondering why people think that UNIFIL and the Lebanese army are going to be able to secure that border area when they've failed to do so since the year 2006. What's going to be different this time?
What is different this time is a very simple new reality that has come to play. And that is the fact that today there is an approach, a regional approach going under a Middle East agreement, if we want to call it, especially with the new US administration coming into the White House, that will follow the Saudi pledge for a zero conflict region. So under a zero conflict region approach, it is expected that a country like Lebanon that has a major conflict with Israel will be one of the countries that will follow the lead of a zero conflict approach for a longer standing peace in the region. Having said that, that means today, after all what happened, Hezbollah will be working closer with the Lebanese government on solutions in Lebanon and not on escalations in Lebanon, whether it's related directly to their role as a resilience group, especially that this role will be over once there is a peace process after the ceasefire with Israel, or after there is an understanding for a long-standing peace. How that will shape up, we're still politically not there. But I think this is the only thing that changed that will give the international community today a strong reason to support the Lebanese army, contrary to what we had in the past. In the past, the Lebanese army was politically dragged into becoming weak because that was the direction in the region. That was how things were done. Today, there's a big push for the Lebanese army to be supported by the international community, to be funded by the international community, to govern and have sovereignty all over the Lebanese territory. And we see that happening. This will be the only path where Lebanon will join the zero conflict process and will witness a long-standing peace in the region.
Minister, one of your colleagues who has been extremely busy the last few weeks is, of course, the Parliament Speaker, Meir, and he has been urging the swift election of a new president of Lebanon. He says this is of the utmost importance. I think everyone agrees on that. It's been talked about for months. Do you think it can now happen?
Well, we were hoping that when all this conflict started, we should seize the opportunity to be unified, all of us Lebanese people, Lebanese parties, to really elect the president. Because everybody knows that one of the major hurdles of electing a president is internal in Lebanon. And now, what we have been through the past year, and particularly the past few months, have brought Lebanese people closer together. We have felt more unity than ever before amongst the different political parties. And I think the Speaker of the House is one of the top politicians that read opportunities and seize opportunities. And today he is a key player in the ceasefire. He sees that there is a serious opportunity now to take advantage of the positive momentum amongst the political parties to bring them back to the parliament and to elect the president, because he knows and we know that the next stage which will require a head of state and a fully fledged government to negotiate and have a seat on the table in the region for the future of the Middle East, the future of Lebanon, the role of Lebanon in the Middle East. Without a head of a state, without a proper government in place, we will always be a weak link and we will not get our best share of the deal.
Indeed, and having a fully functioning government does not mean, does it, the end of Lebanon's problems, because for 5 years now the country's been in financial, economic turmoil. Millions of Lebanese people are living a very difficult existence, plunged into poverty. How is the country going to rebuild? Because this is where you come into play.
Well, I mean, as you know, we've shared a lot of details, I think, in our last get-together on TV, in our last interview about the economy, the billions of dollars, the losses. I think, to answer your question in a very clear way, the only path forward is having a full government in place, reflecting confidence to the international community, particularly regaining very fast the trust of the international community by complying with all the international agreements, including 1701, the Lebanese army moving forward with its presence on the entire territory. But most importantly for the economy, I would say, and for rebuilding Lebanon, and we all know that without the international community, we will not be able to do that. We will need to very, very, very quickly go with the reforms that we have been dragging our feet on for the past few years. We should move forward with the reforms immediately. We should portray and reflect trust to the international community, particularly to the Arab world. Otherwise, it will be difficult to ask anyone for help. It will be difficult to expect that money will be poured on Lebanon to rebuild what has been destroyed and to join the future of economic growth and prosperity in the Middle East. Without doing those, Lebanon will not join that path. And we are hoping we will be able to join that path.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us once again here on Al Arabiya News. Amin Salam. Thank you.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that the ceasefire deal would help Israel to, quote, focus on Iran and give their forces a breather and also isolate the Palestinian militant group Hamas. Well, the Israeli Prime Minister, however, also stressed that his country retains complete military freedom of action.
In full cooperation with the United States, we retain complete military freedom of action. Should Hezbollah violate the agreement or attempt to rearm, we will strike. We will respond forcefully to any violation.
Well, following the ceasefire and Netanyahu's statement, the Israeli army said that its troops remain stationed in southern Lebanon and they had fired at a suspect vehicle. Well, the IDF added that it will operate against anyone who attempts to breach the ceasefire agreement. Well, even as Israel agrees to gradually withdraw its forces from the border with Lebanon, and Netanyahu hails the eradication or the degradation of the Hezbollah militant group, some Israeli nationals are unhappy with the outcome of all this.
We are afraid that the Hezbollah will start again to build forces, and then in several years, as we look to the past, they maybe start another fire between another war between Israel and Lebanon, so we don't happen.
Well, as far as the Arabs, they don't know how to keep an agreement. We have to understand the agreement is not with a state, it's not with a nation, it's with a terrorist group. They don't obligate to anyone. They obligate only to themselves, and in this case to Iran. So the question is how Iran is going to react. If they're going to do anything to support Hezbollah to break the violation, to violate the ceasefire, that will be the end. And the only ones who's going to really suffer this time is going to be the Lebanese citizens.
Well, let's get more from Israel, and we can speak now to the former Deputy Director of Military Intelligence for the IDF, retired Brigadier General Dr. Meir Elran, who is also a senior researcher at INSS Tel Aviv University. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's start by talking about this deal, which brings to an end nearly 14 months of fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. Are you hopeful the ceasefire will hold?
Well, I consider myself to be a very optimistic person. So yes, I do have some hopes about the future, but let me be very clear about that. I mean, my hopes are limited, and the situation is still very, very dangerous, and lots of different things, including very bad things, can happen to us, but also to Lebanon and the stability of the area at large.
Yeah, I mean, obviously not everyone, and we just heard a clip of some people speaking just before we crossed to you, not everyone is delighted with the news of this deal. In fact, there are some very vocal opponents of this deal, not least the National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir. I'm just wondering whether he's, of course, the only member of the cabinet to have voted against this plan. He calls it a serious mistake. But do you think that's very much a minority opinion?
Well, I think that most Israelis are having, looking up to the ceasefire. I think that most of us understand that war is a very ugly thing. We were affected quite severely by the rockets and different kinds of other high trajectory weapons that have been launched against Israel throughout these 14 months. So the situation has not been pleasant. And I think that most Israelis are happy that quiet and some kind of stability will be resumed. But I want just to say one thing. I mean, the most important thing for us right now is to enable the residents of the northern part of Israel to return home safely. This was the major goal of the war as far as against Hezbollah, as far as Israel is concerned. Those people, most of them are very concerned about the security situation over there. And it is imperative, very, very important, not only for them, but for the entire country, that they will indeed be able to return home safely, and that security will not just be something for a few days, but something that will be characterizing the situation in the north for years to come. And this is, of course, our hope. The agreement by itself gives Israel some technical leverages to enable us to keep the security and the stability in the area. But it depends mostly on two factors. Number one, Hezbollah, but mostly Iran, which is standing tight behind Hezbollah. And we'll have to see to what extent what has been happening in Lebanon and what has been happening to Hezbollah and the major crush that they experienced in the last year and 2 months has made a difference as far as Hezbollah and mostly as far as the Iranian perception of their own investments in Lebanon. And I'm wondering about that. Right now, it's too early to judge. But if the Iranians would understand the severity of the situation as far as they're concerned, and how serious Israel is in terms of limiting their capacity to intervene in our neighborhood and to continue their aggressive position, not only against Israel, but against the stability of the Middle East in general. I think this is still an open question, and we'll have to examine very, very carefully what's going on in this respect. So it's up to Hezbollah, it's up to the Iranians. And I think that the Middle East in general needs the stability and quiet. And if we can pursue that, that would be, of course, a very hopeful sign for most people in the Middle East, I think.
Yeah, we've heard from people in the Israeli government, for example, the defense minister, Israel Katz, saying that our ultimate goal is to bring home the hostages who are still being held by Hamas in Gaza. He's also suggested that perhaps shifting attention now from Lebanon back to Gaza could perhaps lead to some sort of a solution there. He's also talked about shifting, well, Netanyahu has talked about shifting attention to Iran, as you were just saying. I mean, what do you think Israel might be planning to do with regards to the Iran threat?
Well, first of all, we have to wait and see and examine exactly what the situation is. We have to remember that we live in a very complex and changing world. The international community is in a constant transition. Things have happened in America. We are waiting for Donald Trump to get into the White House in January. This is a major factor as far as what's happening in the Middle East, and it would necessarily have an impact also on the Iranians. So our victory over Hezbollah on one hand and Donald Trump's presidency on the other hand, and I think also the changes, hopefully, that are going to emerge in Lebanon itself, as far as them Lebanese being sick and tired of Hezbollah and the hardships that it has been bringing over them, I think altogether make a significant change in the situation that might, and again, I'm very careful about that, might bring about some kind of a restraintful approach on the part of the Iranians. This is my hope. This is definitely something that can happen. Iran has very good reasons, I think, to stop its aggression and to, look inside the country with their economic situation and the different other issues, major issues that they have domestically. So this can definitely make a change in the region as a whole. And I want to add to that a change in the region might also impact Hamas, of course, which is pretty much alone now. And as you mentioned yourself, Israel now will be able to exert more pressure on Hamas, with the main idea of bringing about the release of our hostages, 101 people still in captivity in Gaza. This will be, of course, a major, an important advance as far as we are concerned. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, what Netanyahu said by diverting attention away from Lebanon now back to Gaza, does that suggest to you, do you think, that the war in Lebanon on the northern front for Israel was a major drain on Israeli resources and the Israeli military?
Well, of course. I mean, we have been fighting a war on 7 different fronts since October 7th of last year. Israel was not really ready militarily and economically, and I think also as far as the society in Israel, for a protracted war of this duration, of this length. And of course, it has lots of costs as far as Israel is concerned. And this was not an easy war. This was a war in which we suffered huge numbers of casualties, fatalities, and injured people. And it had an impact on the society in Israel at large. And we're still waiting to see what will be the repercussions as far as our economy is concerned. So absolutely, this has been a very difficult war for us, very challenging. And the fact that we are opening now a new chapter, hopefully, with the Lebanese and with Hezbollah in the northern part of the country is something that might, again, optimistically look at the situation, bring about some kind of a relief as far as Israel is concerned. And of course, as you mentioned again, I think that this is very important for everybody in Israel to bring our captured hostages, kidnapped hostages back home. This is something that is emotionally and nationally a major accomplishment that we really need to have and to do it as soon as possible.
And just lastly, one of the other developments we've been keeping an eye on has been what's been happening in Syria. And I gather that Israel has struck inside Syria, killing 6 people today. I'm just wondering what you think the objective is of that Israeli operation.
Well, I don't have the details about this particular operation, but generally speaking, Israel has been very keen on keeping, the pressure and avoiding and thwarting any kind of transfer of arms from Iran, Iraq, via Syria to Lebanon to Hezbollah. And this is probably another one of these actions that are designed to stop these smuggling of arms, mostly sophisticated arms that might be directed or targeted to Israeli localities and military installations. So I think that this is the background to this particular event. But I would like to say further than that, Syria is playing a very dangerous game here. And if they are not very careful about not being active part of the Iranian axis and proxies against Israel, they will be paying the price, no doubt about that. And they are so far they have been part of the axis, of the Iranian axis. And I think it's time for them as well to consider the situation very carefully and to refrain from such actions, because they will be punished for any kind of a mistake that they might be making.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Retired Brigadier General Dr. Meir Elran, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Well, displaced Lebanese civilians were quick to make their way back south to their homes shortly after the ceasefire was announced. That's despite warnings from the military urging them not to return to frontline villages until after the Israeli military withdrawal. For many, the longing to return home was strong, and they simply could not wait.
Going back home is the best feeling. We came back victorious with our heads held high despite all the losses.
We heard the news of the ceasefire and immediately headed back home at dawn.
At 7 a.m. exactly, I was back in Dahya. My wife, as you can see, is crying. We have tears of joy. Our house was fine, but its surroundings, not so much. We lost martyrs. My wife's brother is a martyr.
We started walking through the streets to see our homes. We had truly missed Dahya. It was an emotional moment. This is our home, where we grew up.
Well, for more, we can speak now to the independent MP, Mark Daou, who joins us from Beirut. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, sir. I'd just like to start by asking very simply, what is your reaction to the news of the ceasefire?
This is the best piece of news we've had in the last 60 days. Honestly, Lebanon has been under a crushing aggression by the Israelis. And what has happened to Lebanon with thousands dying, 1,200,000 displaced, and the wealth destroyed, around $9 billion in losses. All of that is a very heavy blow to a country already suffering from an economic crisis. So there is a big sign of relief. Everyone's feeling it, but also I would say a lot of mixed feelings. The issues have not been resolved. The threat of war continues to overbear over everyone. No one's sure, are we going back to normal, or is this just a temporary 60-day test of a ceasefire? Because there hasn't been a formal agreement signed. There's only been a call for a temporary ceasefire to see if the Lebanese army, the state, is willing to take action against Hezbollah's infractions within Lebanon, but also to see if the Netanyahu government is willing to hold their guns from completing the systematic destruction of several villages in Lebanon.
Mr. Daou, I just want to know whether you think this has been a good deal from a Lebanese perspective, because in a message you put out on X or Twitter yesterday, you seemed to imply, admittedly before the deal was struck, that Lebanon looked like it could lose out in the event that a deal was struck. And I was just wondering what the reasoning was behind that.
I think we're definitely, any ceasefire deal is good because we are unable to protect ourselves, honestly, from F-35s and the advanced weaponry of the Israelis. It just became a punishment to the entire population, especially with the random targetings of buildings in Beirut, in the capital, and in downtown Beirut, which is the place that most refugees went there. My fear is that until there is a regional settlement, Lebanon, with its weak state and resources, will be incapable of actually getting enough support to rebuild, to stabilize the situation, to reinforce the Lebanese armed forces, to take back control of the entire decision-making process, whether we go to war and peace from Hezbollah's hands. Till now, Hezbollah remains a dominant political party, and they do have military means, and they have not announced yet that they're willing to hand those over to the Lebanese army and put all their efforts within the state institutions. So far, we're looking at the Lebanese army going to the south, taking control of borders, and then hoping there will be no conflicts with Hezbollah if Hezbollah tries to challenge the assertment of the Lebanese armed forces' control over all military aspects and all weapons in Lebanon.
Clearly, as you suggested in your first answer, there's been tremendous suffering in Lebanon. It must have been a terrifying few months and presumably a really traumatic experience for a lot of people. I mean, what do you think the overall impact has been on the lives of the Lebanese people?
Lebanon has been a country of mass immigration for centuries. And unfortunately, I've seen around me all the youth or the people who have tried to figure out a way to continue with their lives despite the challenges in Lebanon. With this blow, with the massive destruction of this war and the lack of a banking sector in Lebanon and no international interest or serious commitments to rebuild the country, I'm afraid a lot of people are considering another mass wave of immigration from Lebanon to try and find a better chance for their families, their kids, even their own potential outside the country. I'm afraid of the drain that we're gonna see, specifically now, since the government is a caretaker government. We have no president. We don't have fully functional institutions since the 2019 financial crisis that continues still today, don't have accountability even for the Beirut blast and other atrocities that have been committed in Lebanon. Therefore, I think people will have to have a lot of belief in this country to hold on and rebuild everything and find the silver linings of what this country can be, given that we're able to retain our people, our talents, and then bring back what should have been our destiny from the beginning, a country of culture and life and the ability to actually be a positive contributor to the Middle East and the world in terms of peace, stability, and a lot more good things rather than the recipients of deadly bombs.
Yeah, indeed. And there are some analysts who've told this channel that this situation that Lebanon found itself in the last 60 days wouldn't have happened if it had had a proper functioning government, including a head of state, which it hasn't had for 2 years. I mean, the political class really owes it to the people of Lebanon, doesn't it, to deliver and when I say deliver, put squabbling to one side and elect a president, choose a president. Can that now happen? Will that now happen?
I think that is the top of the agenda now. If the Lebanese are serious, especially the representatives, for myself as a member of parliament, I have reiterated my position to be ready to go to parliament at any point in time to elect a president. I think that is the top priority. By the weapons stopping, going silent, then after that, I think we really need to build our national unity by electing a president who's symbolic, getting in a full government with all the capabilities to start the reconstruction and the stabilization. I think that is of utmost importance. And this is where I think is the biggest challenge. The Lebanese army imposing its control on all of Lebanon, no other weapons available. Second, the Lebanese state reconstituting its executive branch. And third, putting in place some actionable plans that can rebuild the country, the banking sector, and revive Lebanon's relations with the Arab world and the international community to a level that we see some serious investments in the country so that everyone can recuperate and Lebanon can contribute positively to the region.
What do you think about Hezbollah's role and how the country is run moving forward? I mean, how powerful are they still as a military and political force? Do you think they have been severely degraded as Israel says they have?
I do believe that their capabilities have been hit extremely hard. They remain a force to reckon with in Lebanon in terms of politics. In terms of their military capabilities, I believe that is the challenge that the Lebanese army has to tackle. And it needs a political agreement among the Lebanese parties to transition from that narrative of building a militia next to the state towards uniting within the state. I think Hezbollah is still a force in Lebanon, but we need to decide if a national dialogue and approach and institutional resolution of Hezbollah's status can be done so it is contained within the state and plays by the rule of the constitution, or if there is an impending confrontation between the opposition, which I'm part of, and Hezbollah over how to steer the country post-war. And I'm afraid that under Iranian influence, Hezbollah might opt for the second one rather than the consensual building national decision-making within the institutions.
Israel is, of course, your neighbor, and that's not going to change. And I wonder how you think, looking forward, you go about constructing some sort of a neighborly relationship with Israel moving forward to ensure that there's no repeat of what's happened the last 60 days?
I think the core is an international agreement, which are the United Nations resolutions, 1701 in specific. And then we've got the armistice agreement agreed back in 1949 between Israel and Lebanon. And I think the last part would be the Arab states and Lebanon committing to the Arab strategy of stabilizing the region and the initiatives led by Saudi Arabia and other countries to try and create political resolutions for the conflicts that are happening. At the core of all that's happening, I think Lebanon needs to prioritize its state building. So for moving forward, it would be a state of Lebanon dealing with the state of Israel. And I think through that, we can start setting some ground rules that would allow for a peaceful resolution for the conflict that was started back in 1948.
And in terms of a resumption of normal daily life for the Lebanese people who haven't known normal daily life now for more than 2 months, when do you think that might start happening? We've got some airlines saying they're going to start resuming flights to Beirut at the beginning of next year, so in January. But that's just the beginning, obviously. But when would you see a resumption of normal daily life for the Lebanese people?
For me, the priority would be saving the school year. We already lost September, October, and November now. So saving the school year and making sure that the children of today don't pay the price for what comes next is the most important thing. Second, I think, is the resumption of economic activities so people can be productive again and not depend on international aid or giveaways or others that are being provided by NGOs and donors. Third, I think, is when those are done, dealing with the destruction, what to do with all the rubble that has been created, how to sort it out, and putting in plans for reconstruction that are fair to those who lost dear ones, lost homes, but also to the populations that have hosted for 2.5 months the displaced, and they have been paying dear resources to sustain refugee centers, displaced centers, and helping out friends and cousins and colleagues from their own pockets to recover. So I think everyone needs a breather, but for sure the priority is saving the kids, getting them back on track, and understanding the psychological impacts will take a long time for all of that to settle. So normal is a very malleable term now.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Independent MP Mark Daou, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Well, world leaders are breathing a sigh of relief after the much-awaited ceasefire deal between Israel and the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah. The United States and France say they're going to be working to ensure the deal is fully implemented. Meanwhile, Germany and the United Kingdom say the truce can be used as a yardstick for further peace talks in the Middle East. And Turkey has welcomed the ceasefire agreement, saying that it hopes that the truce will be a lasting one. Meanwhile, the French President Emmanuel Macron said that the truce deal should allow for the immediate election of a president in Lebanon.
This agreement should also open the path for a ceasefire too long awaited with regards to the incomparable suffering of the population in Gaza. The restoration of Lebanon's sovereignty requires the immediate election of a president of the republic, capable of uniting the Lebanese through the formation of a strong and representative government, and the adoption of the reforms necessary for the country's economic and financial recovery.
The French president speaking there. Well, for more, we can speak now to David Hale, former US ambassador to Lebanon and former US special envoy for peace in the Middle East under President Barack Obama. Thank you so much for joining us. I just want to ask you about these US-mediated talks. Something of an achievement, some are saying, for the outgoing Biden administration. To whom do you give credit for the outcome of these talks?
Well, obviously, the administration worked very hard, led by Amos Hochstein, who is the envoy charged with trying to come up with this agreement. But I think really, to answer your question, it's the achievement of Israel to have done so much to basically diminish Hezbollah's power and bring it to a point where Hezbollah was desperate, I think, for an end to the fighting. We heard we heard Netanyahu say the other day that this is a pause, and frankly, they want to refocus their energies on the main goal, which is Iran. And that, of course, is going to be the big issue for the new incoming Trump administration.
But some people are saying in Lebanon and in Iran, this is a triumph for Hezbollah, that this is an admission of defeat by Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, are there really any winners and losers here?
Well, time will tell. Obviously, Hezbollah is going to put the best face on this that it can, and the TV images clearly show a sense of celebration among its people. And there is a countervailing view among the anti-Hezbollah Lebanese, at least those I'm in touch with, who feel very despondent. But just at a moment when there was the possibility of basically eliminating Hezbollah's military as well as political influence in Lebanon, that opportunity has now been snatched away because of this ceasefire. I would focus less on the arrangements that are going to be made in South Lebanon, which are unlikely to be adequate. They never have been before in the last 40 years of this conflict. But what are we all going to do about Iran? And if the power equation in the Middle East shifts back against Iran, then the elements in Lebanon that want a free, independent country will be reinforced.
But Iran doesn't sound like it's got any intention of shifting its focus away from Lebanon. We've just heard from Tehran. It will show firm support for the Lebanese government, the nation, and for resistance. I mean, that doesn't sound particularly conciliatory, does it?
No, and again, I would expect this to be the case. I think the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards of Iran, are basically running Hezbollah now on a day-to-day basis and continues their support. And as far as I can tell, we don't have a lot of the details of the ceasefire agreement, but nothing's going to stop Iran from continuing to supply weapons and money and rhetorical support to Hezbollah, which, unless we intervene over time, will be able to regain its strength.
Some in Israel do not support this deal that's been put in place with Lebanon. We've heard from Itamar Ben-Gvir saying we're missing a historic opportunity to strike Hezbollah hard, bring them to their knees. I'm just wondering how widely shared you think that opinion is in Washington?
Oh, I don't think it's widely shared here. Obviously, we don't have in Washington the level of attention on the details in Lebanon in the way that the Israeli public and leadership does. I think, frankly, Israel had done about as much as it could have done militarily to counter Hezbollah. This was going to come to an end at some point. Again, I don't want to keep repeating myself, but the real question is, what are we going to do now to continue to press the advantages against Iran that the Israeli operations have created? How can we rebalance the power equation in the Middle East? That's the key question for the Trump administration.
Indeed. Just going back to the deal itself, it's a 60-day truce. What's your understanding of what happens when the 60 days are up?
Well, I guess it's no coincidence, but in 60 days is also when we're going to have a new administration coming into office. During this period, the expectation, I believe, is the Israelis will gradually withdraw from South Lebanon. Hezbollah is likely to continue to claim that Israel remains an occupation of a slender slice of Lebanese territory, which internationally is not recognized, but which Hezbollah uses as a pretext to maintain its so-called resistance. I also think that, frankly, UNIFIL doesn't have the authority by the Security Council to use force against Hezbollah, and nor will this monitoring group that has been discussed be on the ground. So there's really nothing that's going to stop the Hezbollah from putting people back in close proximity of Israel, except the Lebanese army. And the problem with the Lebanese army is not its military capacity, but the political will. It reflects the sectarian makeup of the country and would be loath to put itself in a confrontational position with Hezbollah because of the risk of breaking the army apart. So there's there are a lot of gaps in this agreement that I think Hezbollah will be exploiting, just as they did in 2006 when the last war ended.
But the United States and France have said they're going to help the Lebanese army. What do you understand as being their role? How are they going to support this army and make sure that it actually does a role that doesn't actually then leave a void that gets filled by Hezbollah?
Well, any support for the army is welcome. And we've been, along primarily with the British, doing a great deal to train and equip the Lebanese army. But the flaw in the thinking, I think, is to believe that it's a question of military capacity. It's not. It is a problem of political will. And so we've been supporting the Lebanese army so that there's an alternative, a state-run, state-led, accountable army as an alternative to this foreign-backed militia, Hezbollah, not to confront Hezbollah. That will only come about through a political process. And then we can hopefully point to the Lebanese army as a legitimate alternative to Hezbollah. We're not there yet. There's been nothing that I've seen to suggest that there's any change in the political equation in Lebanon. So it would be premature to believe, frankly, that the Lebanese army's military capacity will make the difference.
It's interesting that Hezbollah had said that they wouldn't cease hostilities until the fighting stopped in Gaza. The fighting continues in Gaza, and yet Hezbollah has agreed to this cessation of hostilities. I'm just wondering why you think they've changed their tune. I mean, is that a sign of weakness and serious degradation, as perhaps Israel might argue?
Yes, and it's an absolute sign of desperation. And there's nothing Hezbollah and Iran wanted more than this ceasefire. So you can draw whatever lessons you want from that or conclusions from that. But they're down, but they're not out. And this ceasefire does give them the opportunity to regain at least some of the strength that they've lost over the last year.
And just looking more broadly at the region, I mean, do you think perhaps credit can be given as well to the Biden administration for the fact that this war did not actually spread further than many had feared it might. It didn't become the regional war that some had feared it might become. Do you think credit is due there for the ability of the Secretary of State to contain it to some extent?
Well, I'm not sure I would agree that it was relatively contained. Obviously, I suppose it could have been worse, but we've had Iranian-directed violence directed at Israel and the United States and its allies and our shipping interests from the Red Sea to Gaza to Lebanon to Iraq. And Iran continues to dominate, frankly, the situation in Baghdad, Beirut, Damascus, and Sana'a. So we are in a regional contest here. It could have gotten hotter and it could still get hotter. But frankly, as a great power, if we're not prepared to stand up to the Iranians, they're going to continue to call the shots in the Middle East. And there'll be another October 7 before you know it, unless we come up with a game plan that's actually going to really, really press the advantages that Israel has gained against Iran.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. David Hale, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well, for more analysis, I'm joined now by Mick Mulvaney, the former Chief of Staff to the US President-elect Donald Trump. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, Mr. Mulvaney. I just want to ask you, first of all, to whom do we give the most credit, do you think? Who deserves the credit for bringing this deal about, which has resulted in a ceasefire in Lebanon?
Well, Tom, thanks for having me. I think you sort of anticipate the answer by your question, which is everyone will always seek to take credit. There's no question about that. My guess is Donald Trump, sitting in Mar-a-Lago here this week, will be making the case, and in fact is making the case that one of the reasons this deal got cut is that Hezbollah was afraid of what he might do when he comes into office in January. At the same time, I'm sure the Biden administration will take credit for doing the hard work necessary to get it done. I think at the end of the day, very few people here really care that much about who takes the credit. We're just glad that the deal was arranged.
Okay, so you would say it's fair to say, therefore, something of a parting victory for the outgoing Biden administration, nevertheless?
Look, I remember back in 1979 when after Ronald Reagan got elected, shortly thereafter, the Iranians released the American hostages. Reagan took credit. Carter took credit. There's no, success has many mothers and failure is an orphan. So I don't think that many people here outside of the immediate Trump circle and the immediate Biden circle are worried that much about who gets the credit.
Okay, this is, of course, a 60-day truce, and we all know that in 60 days from now, there'll be a new administration in the White House. And I just wonder what you think the return of Donald Trump, and I know you've already touched on it briefly, but what do you think his return will mean specifically for this deal?
Well, for this deal and for the broader deal, Trump is going to be a lot more aggressive, I think, than Biden is. Certainly his language will be more aggressive. We know that from his first term in office. But he is not afraid to play at a little bit higher stakes. And I think he's arguably a little bit more aligned with Israel than Joe Biden was. In fact, I think certainly you could make that case. So how the immediate swearing in of Donald Trump takes place in January, which takes place in January, will affect the outcome. It sort of remains to be seen. But generally speaking, I think that Donald Trump is going to be tougher on Iran than Joe Biden was.
Yeah, there is a lot of speculation that now the Lebanon problem is resolved, at least for the next 60 days. Perhaps attention will shift to Gaza and, as you say as well, to Iran. And I just wonder what specifically on Iran Mr. Trump might have in store.
Well, look, face it, we look at least the Republicans in this country, not the least of which Donald Trump, look at Hezbollah and Hamas through the lens of Iran. Without Iran's influence, Hamas and Hezbollah would not be nearly the difficulties that they are. So I think you can expect a much tougher position on the Iranian nuclear program. That's been proven to be the case already. We had a very soft, sort of dovish attitude towards Iran under the Obama administration. It was much more hawkish under Donald Trump in his first administration, a little bit more to the other extreme with Joe Biden. Now the pendulum will be swinging back again with Donald Trump. So if you ask the general question, what will Donald Trump be like on Iran, on Hezbollah, on Hamas in his second term, the answer is pretty much the same as the first.
Okay, and with regards to Gaza, how hopeful are you that now, as I said, Lebanon is resolved, perhaps normal life can start being rebuilt for the Lebanese people? What do you see happening for the people of Gaza?
Well, certainly resolving the issue in Lebanon will make Gaza simpler. I don't want to use easier because it's still a very difficult situation, and it's going to continue to be. But at least now there's only one sort of variable in the conversation. If you can put the Lebanese Hezbollah issue to bed for at least 60 days, and I'm hoping that it lasts longer than that, then you can focus all of our attention here in the U.S. And in your part of the world towards Gaza. Whether or not Hamas is willing to make the sacrifices necessary or make the agreements necessary in order to get peace remains to be seen. But now they'll be back out on their own again, which I think puts the Israelis in a much better position.
Now, you'd know the answer to this question, and I'm curious to know what you think. But don't foreign policy issues invariably look much easier to an administration in opposition than they do to the actual administration that's in office? Because, of course, the administration in office has access to material, to intelligence reports that people outside the administration don't have. Do you think that is the case? And do you think perhaps the reality of the situation is quite different from how it may appear to a party in opposition, i.e. on the campaign trail for Donald Trump and his party?
Sure, I think that's the case for not just global issues, matters of foreign policy, but for most issues. Inflation looks a lot more simple to you when you are in opposition than you are the ruling party, and that's not probably unique to the United States of America. But certainly the issue in Gaza is going to continue to be complicated. Might it be simplified a little bit for purposes of campaigns? Absolutely. There's no question about that. I don't think the average voting American has the time or the interest to get down into every little detail about what's happening in Gaza. So campaigning necessarily probably simplifies that a little bit. But to your point, yes, when you are in office, things are probably a little bit more complicated, and you are playing for keeps. You're playing with real stakes, as we say in the United States. When you're in opposition on the outside looking in, you can be as critical as you want to without much sort of real world implications. But when you're the party in charge, you're playing with real money.
I'd just like to ask you, Mr. Mulvaney, about the new US ambassador to Israel, Mick, and I'd just like to ask you what you think he and his appointment will bring to the region.
Yeah, I've talked to Mr. Governor Huckabee. He was the former governor of the state of Arkansas, ran for president. I know him relatively well. I'm close with his daughter. She and I worked together in the White House. And I've talked to him briefly since his designation as the future U.S. ambassador. I think he brings some clarity of purpose, some clarity of policy, but most importantly, and this applies, I think, around the world, he has a direct line of communication into the White House. I was a special envoy in Northern Ireland after my term in the White House, and one of the things that I thought was the most valuable to me as an envoy of my government, as a member of the diplomatic corps, was to be able to pick up the phone and call the President of the United States directly. And Mike Huckabee will have that. That type of thing makes decision-making quicker, perhaps more effective, and also allows the communication to be clearer and crisper with less with less chance of miscommunication and so forth. So I think it's an excellent pick. I've talked to various communities here in this group, in this country, including some of the Arab American groups and the Israeli American groups, and generally they seem pleased with the decision. Mr. Huckabee has a great deal of credibility, especially within the White House, and I think he'll make an excellent ambassador.
And I'd like to just ask you lastly about the other nominees in the incoming Trump administration, particularly those with a foreign policy portfolio, and what you think they mean for specifically the Middle East.
It's a fascinating sort of process, and we saw this a little bit in the first iteration of the Trump administration, in that Trump likes to surround himself with people who disagree with him and disagree with each other. And disagreement is not to be confused with disloyalty. He's hiring very loyal people. Every president does. But there are people who coming into the White House who see the world generally differently than he does. Marco Rubio, the incoming Secretary of State, would be considered to be more of a neoconservative sort of personality. The same could be said of an incoming national security advisor. This was true, by the way, in the first administration when President Trump brought in John Bolton, who didn't agree with the president on a lot of different things, but the president valued his input into the communication. So what you're going to see again in the second version of Trump is a variety of perspectives inside the White House. There will be people who will be more neoconservative when it comes to foreign policy, those who will be more non-interventionist. There will be folks who are fiercely pro-Israel and folks who are more neutral on issues that happen in the Gulf and so forth. So you'll see a variety of issues, a variety of perspectives brought to the table. And I think that's reflective of the people he's naming so far to the cabinet.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time today. Mick Mulvaney, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Tom.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.